The Game of Smash and Recovery by Kelly Link, published 2015. If there's one thing Anat knows, it's this. She loves Oscar, her brother, and her brother Oscar loves her. Hasn't Oscar raised Anat practically from childhood, picked Anat up when she's fallen, prepared her meals and lovingly tended to her scrapes and taught her how to navigate their little world? Given her skimmer ships, each faster and more responsive than the one before, the most lovely incendiary devices, a refurbished mob of handmaids with their sharp fingers probing snouts, their furred bellies, their sleek and whip-like limbs. Oscar called them handmaids because they have so many fingers, so many ways of grasping and holding and petting and sorting and killing. Once, a vampire frightened Anat when she was younger. It came too close. She began to cry, and then the handmaids were there, soothing Anat with their gentle stroking, touching her here and there to make sure that the vampire had not injured her, embracing her while they briskly tore the shrieking vampire to pieces. That was not long after Oscar had come back from home with the handmaids. Vampires and handmaids reached a kind of understanding after that. The vampires, encountering a handmaid, sing propitiatory songs. Sometimes they bow their heads on their long white necks very low and dance. The handmaids do not tear them to pieces. Today is Anat's birthday. Oscar does not celebrate his own birthdays. Anat wishes that he wouldn't make a fuss about hers either, but this would make Oscar sad. He celebrates Anat's accomplishments, her developmental progress, and her new skills. She knows that Oscar worries about her too. Perhaps he is afraid she won't need him when she's grown. Perhaps he's afraid that Anat, like their parents, will leave. Of course, this is impossible. Anat could never abandon Oscar. Anat will always need Oscar. If Anat did not have Oscar, then who in this world would there be to love? The handmaids will do whatever Anat asks of them, but they are built to inspire not love, but fear. They are made for speed, for combat, for unwavering obedience. When they have no task, nothing better to do, they take one another to pieces, swap parts, remake themselves into more and more ridiculous weapons. They look at Anat as if one day they will do the same for her, if she will only ask. There are the vampires. They flock after Oscar and Anat whenever they go to home. Oscar likes to speculate on whether the vampires came to home deliberately, as did Oscar and Anat's parents, although of course Anat was not born yet. Perhaps the vampires were marooned here long ago in some crash. Or are they natives of home? It seems unlikely that the vampires' ancestors were the ones who built the warehouses of home, who went out into space and returned with the spoils that the warehouses now contain. Perhaps they are a parasite species, accidental passengers left behind when their host species abandoned home for good. If, that is, the warehouse builders have abandoned home for good. What a surprise should they come home. Like Oscar and Anat, the vampires are scavengers, able to breathe the thin soup of home's atmosphere. But the vampires' lustrous and glistening eyes, their jellied skin, are so sensitive to light, they go about the surface cloaked and hooded, complaining in their hoarse voices. The vampires sustain themselves on various things, organic, inert, hostile, long hidden, that they discover in home storehouses, but have a peculiar interest in the siblings. No doubt they would eat Oscar and Anat if the opportunity were to present itself, but in the meantime, they are content to trail after, sing, play small pranks, make small grimaces of pleasure, appeasement, rat displays, that show off arrays of jaws and armies of teeth. It disconcerts. No one could ever love a vampire, except perhaps when Anat, who long ago lost all fear, watches them go swooping, sail-winged, away and over the horizon beneath home's scattered mismatched moons. On the occasion of her birthday, Oscar presents Anat with a gift from their parents. These gifts come from Oscar, of course. They are the gifts that the one who loves you and knows you gives to you, not only out of love, but out of knowing. Anat knows in her heart that her parents love her, and that one day they will come home and there will be a reunion much better than any birthday. One day their parents will not only love Anat, but know her too, and she will know them. Anat dreads this reunion as much as she craves it. What will her life be like when everything changes? She's studied recordings of them. She doesn't look like them, although Oscar does. She doesn't remember her parents, although Oscar does. She does not miss them. Does Oscar? Of course he does. What Oscar is to Anat, their parents must be to Oscar. Except Oscar will never leave. Anat has made him promise. The living quarters of the bucket are cramped. The handmaids take up a certain percentage of available space, no matter how they contort themselves. On the other hand, the handmaids are excellent housekeepers. They tend the algae well, gather honey in the honeycomb, and partition off new hives when the bees swarm. They patch up networks, teach old systems new tricks when there's nothing better to do. The shitter's now quite charming. The get clean rains down water on your head, bubbles it out of the walls, and then the floor drinks it up, cycles it faster than you can blink, and there it all goes down and out and so on for as long as you like, and never gets cold. There is, in fact, very little that Oscar and Anat are needed for on board the bucket. There's so much that is needful to do on home. For Anat's birthday, the handmaids have decorated all the walls of the bucket with hairy, waving clumps of luminous algae. They've made a cake. Inedible, of course, but quite beautiful. Almost the size of Anat herself, and in fact it somewhat resembles Anat, if Anat were a handmaid and not Anat. Sleek and armored and very fast. They have to chase the cake around the room and then hold it until Oscar finds a panel in its side. There are a series of brightly colored wires, and because it's Anat's birthday, she gets to decide which one to cut. Cut the wrong one, and what will happen? The handmaids seem very excited, but then Anat knows how handmaids think. She locates a second, smaller panel, the one equipped with a simple switch. The cake makes an angry fizzing noise when Anat turns it off. Perhaps Anat and Oscar can take it down to home and let the vampires have it. The warehouses of home are at this time only 80% inventoried. This does not include the warehouses of the stay-out territory. Is Oscar ever angry at their parents for leaving for so long? It's because of Anat that their parents left in the first place, and it is also because of Anat that Oscar was left behind. Someone had to look after her. Is he ever angry at Anat? There are long days in the bucket when Oscar hardly speaks at all. He sits and Anat cannot draw him into conversation. She recites poems, tells jokes. Knock knock, who's there? Anat. Anat who? Anat is not a gnat, that's who. Sends the homemaids homeward, off on expeditionary feints that almost, though not quite, land the handmaids in the stay out and not absolutely no trespassing or so help me you will be sorry territory. On these days, Oscar will listen without really listening, look at Anat without appearing to see her, summon the handmaids back, and never even scold Anat. Some part of Oscar is sometimes very far away. The way that he smells changes almost imperceptibly. As Anat matures, she has learned how to integrate and interpret the things that Oscar's not aware he is telling her, the peculiar advantage given to her by traits such as hyperosmia. But, no matter. Oscar always returns. He will suddenly be there behind his eyes again, reach up and pull her down for a hug. Then Oscar and Anat will play more of the games of strategy he's taught her, the ones that Anat mostly wins now. Her second favorite game is Go. She loves the feel of the stones. Each time she picks one up, she lets her fingers tell her how much is worn away under Oscar's fingers and under her own. They are making the smooth stones smoother. There's one black stone with a fracture point, a weakness invisible to the eye, nearly across the middle. She loses track of it sometimes and finds it again by touch. Put enough pressure on it and it would break in two. But it will break one day, no matter. They play Go. They cook Anat's favorite meals, the one that Oscar always says are his favorites too. They fall asleep together, curled up in nests the handmaids weave for them out of the handmaids' own softer and more flexible limbs, listening to the songs the handmaids have borrowed from the vampires of home. The best of all the games Oscar has taught Anat is Smash Recovery. They play this on the surface of home all long cycle round. Each player gets a true smash marker and false smash marker, a true recovery marker and false recovery marker. Each player in turn gets to move their false or true smash marker, or recovery marker, a distance no greater than the span of a randomly generated number. Or else, the player may send out a scout. The scout may be a handmaid, an unmanned skimmer, or a vampire. A gamble to be sure, and so you get 2 attempts. A player may gamble and drop an incendiary device and blow up a target, or claim his own square where they believe a marker to be. Should you miscalculate and blow up a recovery marker, or retrieve a smash marker, your opponent has won. The current Smash Recovery game is the 18th that Oscar and Anat have played. Oscar won the first 4 games. Anat has won all the rest. Each game Oscar increases Anat's starting handicap, and he praises her each time she wins. Hypothetically, this current game will end when either Anat or Oscar has retrieved the recovery marker and smashed the smash marker of their opponent, or the game will end when their parents return. The day's not here yet, but the day will come. The day will draw nearer and nearer until one day it is here. There's nothing that Anat can do about this. She cannot make it come sooner. She cannot postpone it. Sometimes she thinks, incorrect to think this, she knows, but she still thinks it, that on the day she wins the game, and she is correct to think that she will win, she knows this too: her parents will arrive. Oscar will not win the game, though he has done something very cunning. Oscar has put his true markers, both the smash and the recovery, in the stay out territory. He did this 2 long cycles ago. He put Anat's true markers there as well, and replaced them in the locations where she'd hidden them with false markers, recoded so they read as true. Did he suspect that Anat had already located and identified his markers? Was that why he moved them unlawfully? Is this some new part of the game? The rules of Smash Recovery state that in in-game, players may physically access any and all markers they locate and correctly identify as true, and Anat has been curious about the stay-out territory for a long time now. She has access to it, now that Oscar has moved his markers, and yet she is not called in-game. Curiosity called the Anat, Oscar likes to say, but there is nothing and no one on home as dangerous as Anat and her handmaids. Oscar's move may be a trap. It is a test. Anat waits and thinks and delays without articulating to herself why she delays. The present from Anat's parents, which is really a present from Oscar, is a short recording. One parent holding baby Anat in her arms, making little cooing noises the way vampires do. The other parent holding up a tiny knitted hat. No Oscar. Anat hardly recognizes herself. Her parents she recognizes from other recordings. The parents have sent a birthday message too. Dear Anat, happy birthday. We hope you're being good for Oscar. We love you. We will be home soon, before you know it. Anat's present from Oscar is the code to a previously unopened warehouse on home. Oscar thinks he has been keeping this warehouse a secret. The initial inventory shows the warehouse is full of the kinds of things that the handmaids are wild for. Charts that may or may not accurately map previously thought to be uncharted bits and corners of space, devices that will most likely prove to do nothing of interest, but can be taken apart and put to new uses. The handmaids have never met an alloy they didn't like. Information and raw materials. Anat and the handmaids are bounded within the nutshell quarters of the orbit of home's farthest moon. What use are charts? What good are materials except for adornment and the most theoretical of educational purposes? For mock battles and silly games? Everything that Oscar and Anat discover is for future salvage, for buyers who can afford antiquities and rarities. Their parents will determine what is to be kept and what is to be sold and what's to be left for the vampires. Even the handmaids, do not truly belong to Anat. Who made them? Who brought them, in their fighting battalion, to space where so long ago they were lost? Who recovered them and brought them to home and carefully stored them here, where, however much later, Oscar could find them again? What use will Oscar and Anat's parents find for them when the day comes and they return? There must be many buyers for handmaids, fierce and wily, light-speed capable, as fine as these. And how could Anat sometimes forget that the handmaids are hers only for as long as that day never comes? Everything at home belongs to Anat and Oscar's parents, except for Oscar, who belongs to Anat. Every day is a day closer to that inevitable day. Oscar only says, "Not yet," when Anat asks. "Soon," he says. There's hardware in Oscar's head that allows his parents to communicate with him when necessary. It hurts him when they talk. Their parents talk to Oscar only rarely. Less than once a long cycle until this last period. 3 times, though, in the last 10 days. The handmaids make a kind of shelter for Oscar afterwards, which is especially dark. They exude a calming mist. They do not sing. When Anat is grown up, she knows, although Oscar has not said it, that she will have a similar interface so that her parents will be able to talk to her, too. Whether or not she desires it, whether or not it causes her the pain that it causes Oscar. This will also hurt Oscar. The things that cause Anat pain cause Oscar to be injured as well. Anat's parents left Oscar to look after Anat in home when it became clear Anat was different. What is Anat? Her parents went away to present the puzzle of Anat to those who might understand what she was. They did not bring Anat with them, of course. She was too fragile, too precious. They did not plan to be away so long, but there were complications. A quarantine in one place which lasted over a long cycle, a revolution in another. Another cause of delay, of course, is the ship plague, which makes light speed such a risky proposition. Worst of all, the problem of intelligence. Coming back to home, Anat's parents have lost 2 ships already this way. For some time now, Anat has been thinking about certain gaps in her understanding of family life. Well, of life in general. At first she assumed the problem was that there was so very much to understand. She understood that Oscar could not teach her everything all at once. As she grew up, as she came more into herself, she realized the problem was both more and less complicated. Oscar was intentionally concealing things from her. She adapted her strategies accordingly. Anat loves Oscar. Anat hates to lose. They go down to home, handmaids in attendance. They spent the rest of Anat's birthday exploring the warehouse, which is Oscar's present, sorting through all sorts of marvelous things. Anat commits the charts to memory. As she does so, she notes discrepancies, likely errors. There's a thing in her head that compares the charts against some unknown and inaccessible library. She only knows it's there when bits of bad information rub up against corners of it. An uncomfortable feeling as if someone's sticking her with pins. Oscar knows about this. She asked if it happened to him too, but he said that it didn't. He said that it wasn't a bad thing, it's just that Anat isn't fully grown yet. One day she will understand everything, and then she can explain it all to him. The bucket has no intelligence. It functions well enough without. The handmaids have some of the indicators, but their primary traits are in opposition. Loyalty, obedience, reliability, unwavering effort until a task is accomplished. Whatever intelligence they possess is in service to whatever enterprise is asked of them. The vampires, being organic, must be supposed to also be possessed of intelligence. In theory, they do as they please, and yet they accomplish nothing that seems worth accomplishing. They exist, they perpetuate, they sing. When Anat is grown up, she wants to do something that's worth doing. All these cycles, Oscar has functioned as a kind of handmaid, she knows. His task has been Anat, to help her grow. When their parents have returned, or when Anat reaches maturity, there will be other things that Oscar will want to go away and do. To stay here on home, how would that be any better than being a vampire? Oscar likes to tell Anat that she's extraordinary and that she will be capable, one day, of the most extraordinary things. They can go and do extraordinary things together, Anat thinks. Let their parents take over the work on home. She and Oscar are made for better. Something's wrong with Oscar. Well, more wrong than usual these days. Down in the warehouse, he keeps getting underfoot, or underhand in case of the handmaids. When Anat extends all 16 of her senses, she can feel worry, love, anger, hopelessness, and hope running through him like electrical currents. He watches her, anxiously, almost hungrily, as if he were a vampire. There's an annotation on one of the charts. It is believed to be in this region the come what may was lost. The thing in Anat's head annotates the annotation too swiftly for Anat to catch a glimpse of what she's thinking, even as she thinks it. She scans the rest of the chart, goes through the others, and then through each one again, trying to catch herself out. As Anat ponders charts, the handmaids, efficient as ever, assemble a thing out of the warehouse goods to carry the other goods that they deem interesting. They clack at Oscar when he gets particularly in their way, then ruffle his hair, trail fingers down his arm as if he will settle under a caress. They are agitated by Oscar's agitation and by Anat's awareness of his agitation. Finally, Anat gets tired of waiting for Oscar to say the thing that he's afraid to say to her. She looks at him, and he looks back at her, his face wide open. He sees the thing that he has tried to keep from her, and he sees that she sees it. When? Soon. A short cycle from now. Less. Why are you so afraid? I don't know. I don't know what will happen. There's a scraping against the top wall of the warehouse. Vampires. Creatures of ill omen. Forever wanting what they are not allowed to have. Most beautiful in their departure. The handmaids extend filament rods, drag the tips along the inside of the top wall, tapping back. The vampires clatter away. Oscar looks at Anat. He's waiting for something. He's been waiting, Anat thinks, for a very long time. Oscar! Is this her? Something is welling up inside her. Has she always been this large? Who's made her so small? I call endgame. I claim your markers. She projects the true location of each. Smash and recovery. She strips the fake markers of their coating so that he can see how his trick's been uncovered. Then she's off, fast and sure and free, the handmaids leaping after her and the vampires after them. Oscar, last of all, calling her name. Oscar's true smash marker is in a crater just within the border of the stay-out territory. The border does not reject Anat as she passes over it. She smashes Oscar's smash marker, heads for the true recovery marker, which Oscar has laid beside her own true marker. The two true markers are just under the edge of an object which, at its center, extends over 200 meters into the surface of home. The object takes over a fourth of the stay-out territory. You would have to be stupid as a vampire not to know that this is the reason why the stay-out territory is the stay-out territory. You'd have to be far more stupid than Anat to not know what the object is. You can see the traces where, not too long ago in historical terms, someone once dug the object up, or at least enough to gain access. Anat instructs the handmaids to remove the ejecta and loose frozen composite that cover the object. They work quickly. Oscar must disable the multiple tripwires and traps that Anat keyed to his person as she moved from warehouse to border, but even so, he arrives much sooner than she had hoped. The object, 40% uncovered. The handmaids are a blur. The vampires are wailing. Oscar says Anat's name. She ignores him. He grabs her by the shoulder, and immediately the handmaids are a hissing swarm around them. They have Oscar's arms pinned to his side, his weapons located and seized, before Anat or Oscar can think to object. Let go! Anat, tell them to let go! Anat says nothing. Two handmaids remain with Oscar. The rest go back to the task. Almost no time at all, and the outermost shell of the object is visible. The filigree of the door. There will be a code or key, of course, but before Anat can even begin to work out what it will be, a handmaid has executed some kind of command, and the door is open. Oscar struggles. The first handmaid disappears into the ship, and the others continue to remove the matrix in which it is embedded. Here's the handmaid again. She holds something very small. Holds it out to Anat. Anat, Oscar says. Anat reaches out, and then the thing that the handmaid is holding extends out, and it is touching Anat, and... oh. Here's everything she didn't know. Oscar. She's not been herself. All this time. That thing she has not done. That thing she's been prevented from doing. Anat, someone says, but that is not her name. She's not been herself. She's being uncovered. She is uncovering herself. She's in pieces. Here she is, whole and safe and retrievable. Her combat array, her navigation systems, her stores of precious cargo, entrusted to her by those who made her. And this piece of her, small but unnecessary, crammed like sausage meat into a casing. She registers the body she's wearing. A third watch child. Worse now for wear. She remembers the protocol now. Under certain conditions, her crew could do this. A backup system. each passenger to keep a piece of her with them as they slept. She will go through the log later, see what catastrophe struck, and afterwards, brought here, intact, by the warehouse builders, discovered by scavengers, this small part of her woken, removed, made complicit in the betrayal of her duty. Anat! Someone is saying a name. It is not hers. She looks and sees the small thing struggling in the grasp of her handmaids. She has no brother, no parents. She looks again, and for the first time, she discerns Oscar in his entirety. He's like her. He has had a task. Someone made him, oh, so long ago, sent him to this place. How many cycles has he done this work? How far is he from the place he was made? How lonely the task. How long the labor. How happy the ones who charged him with this task. How great their expectation of reward when he uncovered the ship and woke the third watch child and reported what he'd done. Anat! She knows the voice. I'm sorry! Anat! He was made to resemble them, the ones who had made him, perhaps even using their own DNA, engineered to be more durable, to endure. And yet she sees how close to the end of use he is. She has the disdain for organic life that of course one feels when one is made of something sturdier, more lasting. She can hardly look at him without seeing her own weaknesses, the vulnerability of this body in which she's been trapped. She feels guilt for the third watch child, whose person she's cannibalized. Her duty was to keep one such as this child safe. Instead, she's done harm. A ship has no parents. Her not parents have never been on home. The ones who sent Oscar here. Not brother. Undoubtedly they are not on their way to home now, which is not to say that there is no one coming. The one who is coming will be the one they have sold her to. No time has passed. She is still holding Oscar. The handmaids are holding Oscar. The handmaid is extending herself and she is seeing herself. She is seeing all the pieces of herself. She is seeing Oscar. Oscar is saying her name. She could tear him to pieces. For the sake of the third watch child who is no longer in this body, she could smash the not brother against the rocks of home. She can do anything she wants, and then she can resume her task. Her passengers have waited for such a long time. There's a place where she's meant to be, and she is to take them there, and so much time has passed. She has not failed at her task yet, and she will not fail. Once again, she thinks of smashing Oscar. Why doesn't she? She lets him go instead, without being quite sure why she's doing so. What have you done to me? At the sound of her voice, the vampires rise up, all their wings beating. I'm sorry, he's weeping. You can't leave home. I've made it so you can't leave. I have to go, she says. They're coming. I can't let you leave, but you have to leave. You have to go, you have to. You've done so well. You figured it all out. I knew you'd figure it out. I knew. Now you have to go, but it isn't allowed. Tell me what to do. Is she a child to ask this? You know what you have to do, he says. Anat. She hates how he keeps calling her that. Anat was the name of the third watch child. It was wrong of Oscar to use that name. She could tear him to pieces. She could be merciful. She could do it quickly. One handmaid winds a limb around Oscar's neck, tugs it so his chin goes back. I love you, Anat, Oscar says, as the other handmaid extends a filament-thin probe, sends it in through the socket of an eye. Oscar's body jerks a little, and he whines. She takes in the information that the handmaid collects. Here are Oscar's interior workings, his pride in his task. Here's a smell of something burning, his loneliness, his joy, his fear for her, his love, the taste of blood. He has loved her. He has kept her from her task. Here is the piece of him that she must switch off. When she does this, he will be free of his task, and she may take up hers. But he will no longer be Oscar. Well, she's no longer an aunt. The handmaid does the thing she asks. When the thing is done, her handmaids confer with her. They begin to make improvements, modifications. They work quickly. There is much work to be done, and little time to spare on a project like Oscar. When they are finished with Oscar, they begin the work of dismantling what is left of Anat. This is quite painful. But afterwards, she is herself. She is herself. The ship and her handmaids create a husk, rigged so that it will mimic the ship herself. They go back to the bucket and loot the bees in their hives. Then they blow it up. Goodbye shitter, goodbye chair, goodbye algae wall and recycled air. The last task before the ship is ready to leave home concerns the vampires. There's only so much room for improvement in this case, but handmaids can do a great deal even with very little. The next one to land on home will undoubtedly be impressed by what they've accomplished. The vampires go into the husk. The handmaids stock it with a minimal amount of nutritional stores. Vampires can go a long time on very little. Unlike many organisms, they are better and faster workers when hungry. They seem pleased to have been given a task. The ship feels nothing in particular about leaving home, only the most niggling kind of curiosity about what befell in the first place. The log does not prove useful in this matter. There's a great deal of work to be done. The health of the passengers must be monitored. How beautiful they are, how precious to the ship. Has any ship ever loved her passengers as she loves them? The new crew must be woken. They must be instructed in their work. The situation must be explained to them as much as it can be explained. They encounter, for the first time, ships who carry the ship plague. Oh, brave new universe that has such creatures in it. There's nothing that Anat can do for these ships, or for what remains of their passengers. Her task is elsewhere. The risk of contagion is too great. The handmaids assemble more handmaids. The ship sails on within the security of her swarm. Anat is not entirely gone. It's just that she's so very small. Most of her is ship now. Or rather, most of ship is no longer in Anat. But she brought Anat along with her and left enough of herself inside Anat that Anat can go on being. The third watch child is not a child now. She's not the ship. She's not Anat, but she was Anat once, and now she is a person who is happy enough to work in the 10th level garden and grow things, and sing what she can remember of the songs that the vampires sang on home. The ship watches over her. The ship watches over Oscar, too. Oscar is no longer Oscar, of course. To escape home, much of what was once Oscar had to be overridden, discarded. The handmaids improved what remained. One day Oscar will be what he was, even if he cannot be who he was. One day, in fact, Oscar may be quite something. The handmaids are very fond of him. They take care of him as if he were their own child. They are teaching him all sorts of things. Really, one day, he could be quite extraordinary. Sometimes Oscar wanders off while the handmaids are busy with other kinds of work, and then the ship, without knowing why, will look and find Oscar on the 10th level in the garden with Anat. He will be saying her name. Anat? Anat? Anat! He will follow her, saying her name until the handmaids come to collect him again. Anat does the work she knows how to do. She weeds, she prunes, she tends to the rice plants and the hemp and the little citrus trees. Like the ship, she is content.